Natalie Walker had been working as an American Sign Language interpreter at Children's Hospital when she first saw him. Artem Ivanov, a millionaire with the guarded posture of a man who has built walls around everything that used to be soft. He was sitting in a small hospital room, crying over a drawing made by his deaf 7-year-old son. On the paper was a woman's face, dark hair, kind eyes, a gentle smile. It was Natalie's face. The boy had been drawing the same unfamiliar woman every day for 3 months. What Natalie did next would shake everybody who knew them. The hospital's children's wing reflected the morning light off its white walls. Natalie, 28, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, folder tucked under her arm, hurried down the corridor. Her badge read, ASL Interpreter. She stopped at room 12, smoothed her blouse, inhaled and knocked. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Inside, a man in an expensive suit sat hunched over a child's drawing. Artem Ivanov, 35, broad-shouldered, eyes worn from too many sleepless nights, looked up. His cheeks were wet with tears. On the bed lay Max, 7 years old, pale hair, large blue eyes that watched everything like a little scientist. Arthur wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. "I didn't know someone would come," he said, voice rough. Natalie saw the sketch in his hands, a female face with dark hair and a tender smile. She recognized herself, but remained quiet. "I'm Natalie Walker," she signed, and then spoke the words aloud as she usually did in hospitals when approaching hearing families who needed context. "I'm the interpreter. They call me to see Max." Arthur stood. He was much taller than she was, and his eyes fell to a cluttered bedside table stacked with drawings. Dozens of sheets were there, each with the same face. "He draws her every day," Arthur whispered, fingers tracing a paper edge. "For 3 months. I don't understand who she is. The doctors say he sees her in his dreams." Max turned toward them and brightened when he saw Natalie. He sat up quickly and began signing with the energetic haste of a child who has much to tell. Natalie watched his hands and translated as she always did. "An angel came. An angel from my dreams." Arthur's hands trembled. "What else?" he asked. Natalie watched and interpreted. "She helps me not to be scared. When I'm afraid, she takes my hand. She says that Daddy loves me, but he just doesn't know how to show it." Arthur let himself sink into the chair, and the tears came again. "I don't know how to talk to my own son," he said quietly. "Since my wife died, I don't know how to be a father to a deaf child." Max reached for Natalie. She moved closer and sat on the edge of his bed. The boy took her hand and placed it over his heart. "What is he doing?" Arthur asked. "He's showing me that I live in his heart." Natalie signed and then spoke it, voice trembling. Max signed again. "She's my mother from dreams." Arthur sprang up and went to the window, turning his back to the bed. His own mother had died 2 years earlier. Anna, the woman he'd loved and lost, had been everything to him. She had known sign language. "I didn't even try to learn," Arthur said in a half-confession. Max's hands moved more quickly, as if the urgency of his feelings rushed to find form. Natalie interpreted. He asked why his father was crying, that he wanted to hug his father but was afraid to do so. Arthur turned. His suit was crumpled, his tie askew. "Tell him," he whispered to Natalie, pleading. "Tell him I love him." Natalie signed the words. Max smiled and stretched his arms out to his father. Arthur came to the bed awkwardly, sat down, and wrapped his arms around his son. "I built a company worth billions," he murmured, "but I can't say simple words of love to my son." Max ran a small hand up his father's cheek and then, with new hand sign practice, showed something else. Natalie watched the movement, and it made something ache in her chest. "What's he saying now?" Arthur asked. Natalie read the signing and translated. "Angel will teach Daddy to speak with his hands, and then we will be a real family." Silence hung in the room. Arthur looked at Natalie for a long beat and asked in the flattest voice possible, "Can you teach me? Can sign language be learned?" "Yes," Natalie said, "but it takes time and patience. I have money. How much do you want?" Arthur blurted. He had the kind of money that could make people do anything. Natalie shook her head. "It's not about money. This boy is different. He can sense falsehood. If you're not ready to open your heart, the signs won't help." Max took Natalie's hand and then his father's hand and he linked them. A tiny electric shock seemed to pass between the two adults. Natalie pulled her hand away. "I have other patients," she murmured, pulling herself up. Arthur rose too. "Wait, how do I find you?" he asked. "I work here every day," Natalie said at the door. "Why does my son draw your face?" Arthur called as she left. Natalie flushed. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe children see things adults don't." She left the room and walked down the corridor. Arthur stayed behind with his son. Max pointed at the door and signed. Arthur whispered to himself, but could not answer. He didn't understand his own son's language. Outside the door, Natalie leaned against the wall and put her hand to her chest. Her heart raced. She looked at her reflection in the black screen of her phone. Why does Max draw me? And why does the touch of that man make me feel so strange? Her nurse called her away. "Natalie, you're needed in Ward 5. She answered and glanced back once more at room 12. Behind a closed door, Max drew again. This time he drew a trio, a man, a woman, and a small boy holding hands. An hour later, Natalie returned to room 12 carrying a tray of food for Max. In the corridor, a doctor stopped her. "Something is wrong with your patient," he said quietly. "The father doesn't understand him. Can you talk to Mr. Ivanov?" Natalie nodded and entered the room. Arthur sat in the same chair. Phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp and cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. The contract must be signed today." Max lay on the bed, his tears falling silently down his cheeks. Natalie placed the tray on the table and crouched to the child's level. "What's wrong, sunshine?" she signed. Max answered with trembling hands. "Daddy yells. I am scared. I want mommy." Arthur continued the call, as if he couldn't hear how his son was falling apart. "I don't care. Find a solution or find another job," he snapped into the phone. Natalie put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. He turned, irritated, and covered the handset. "1 minute," he said into the phone. "What's the matter with you?" "Your son is crying," Natalie said quietly but firmly. "He's afraid when you shout." Arthur looked at Max as the child turned his face to the wall. "I work," he said, voice flat. "I have important things to do, and your son has an important father." "He has a father who doesn't talk to him," Natalie answered. "That's the problem." Arthur ran a hand through his hair. The exhaustion in his eyes deepened. "I don't know how," he admitted. "After Anna, I was lost." Natalie sat on the edge of Max's bed. The boy pressed his cheek to her hand. "Tell me about Anna," she asked softly. Arthur's voice softened, and he began to tell the story the way grief loosens itself in the telling. Anna had been a translator. They'd met at a business meeting with foreign partners. She had interpreted for a Japanese delegation. She had learned sign language even while pregnant. When they found out the baby would be deaf, she insisted on keeping him. "Love is not about hearing," she used to say, and she spent the months before her illness learning signs so she could tell Max everything. Max watched his father's lips as Arthur spoke, trying to understand the syllables. He signed to Natalie that he remembered his mother's warm, gentle hands. Arthur covered his face with his palms, and his voice broke. Anna had died of cancer after 1.5 years of illness. "She taught me sign for as long as she could," Arthur said, "but I didn't want to accept that she would leave. I thought we had more time." Natalie understood then what frightened Arthur. Not that he couldn't learn signs, but that loving his son fully meant risking loss again. She said what she always said to people who had been consumed by fear. Good fathers are the ones who are afraid of failing. Bad fathers don't care. You are not a bad father. You're a scared father. Max walked to his father and gently wiped his tears with small hands. "What is he doing?" Arthur whispered. "He's wiping your tears," Natalie translated, and then Max began signing rapidly. Natalie interpreted, "Daddy, don't cry. Mom told me in a dream that you're the best dad in the world. You just forgot how to show it." Arthur hugged his son like a man clinging to a rope. "I'm so afraid of doing it wrong," he whispered. "What if I can't be a good father?" "That's what good fathers worry about," Natalie said. Max stepped back and signed to both of them. "Do you want to learn to speak with hands?" Arthur looked from his son to Natalie. "It's harder than running a business," she smiled, then added seriously, "but you can learn." "I don't have time for this," Arthur started, but stopped. "Please, Arthur. This isn't nonsense. It's important." Max clapped his hands and signed with glee. He was thrilled. "Now I'll have a real dad," he seemed to say. Arthur stood and reached for Natalie's hand. "When can we start?" he asked. "Now," she replied, taking his hand. Where before there had been a tiny electric flicker of connection, this time neither of them pulled away. Natalie began the first lesson by showing Arthur the sign, "For I love you." He imitated, fingers stiff at first. Max laughed and adjusted his father's fingers like a proud tutor. "He's the best teacher," Natalie said. The three of them joined hands. 3 hands, 3 hearts, 1 family. Though none of them could know then how fragile and brave that new family would have to be to survive what came next. That evening, Natalie walked up to her small apartment in Midtown, warm, tidy, books on shelves, photographs of children from the school for the deaf pinned to the wall. She put the kettle on and glanced at the clock. 7. Arthur had said he would come at 7. A soft knock. Natalie opened the door to find Arthur in jeans and a sweater, no suit. He carried a bouquet of white roses and tried, a little awkwardly, "Good evening. These are for you, for helping me." Their fingers brushed carrying the flowers inside. She felt heat where his skin met hers. He looked around. "It's cozy." They sat. Natalie put the roses in a vase and took out a notebook and pen. "We'll start with the alphabet," she said. She showed the letter A with her hands. Arthur tried to form the signs. His fingers wouldn't obey. "It's not working," he said, frustrated. "It will," Natalie soothed. And then, to help, she stood and guided his hand from behind, placing his fingers gently in the right shape. Her skin pressed to the back of his hand. There was warmth, a roughness that spoke of a life of work, a faint, expensive cologne that was not too sharp. "Feel that?" she whispered, and he answered with a soft, hoarse yes. She taught him a few more letters, each time correcting his fingers by touch. Sparks, small, human ones, seemed to leap between them. "Now try the sign for Dad," she said, stepping back. He tried. It was awkward but recognizable. "Almost perfect," Natalie smiled, then moved close again and adjusted his hands. "Dad," she said aloud and with the sign. Arthur repeated it, and then, suddenly, his eyes filled with tears. "What's wrong?" Natalie asked, alarmed. "It's the first time I've said that word in my son's language," Arthur whispered. "For 7 years." A tear rolled down his cheek, and Natalie reached out and wiped it gently. "Max will be happy," she said softly. "I'm a bad father," Arthur admitted. "After Anna, I escaped into work. I built the company, closed the deals, made the money. And he grew up alone." "You're not a bad father," Natalie corrected. "You are a frightened one. Different things." "How can you know that?" Arthur asked, looking at her. "Because I've watched scared fathers," she said. "Women who love children. Men who freeze when something matters. I know people." "Do you have children?" he asked suddenly. "No." She looked away, a small, private sadness there. "My life has been for working with kids, hospitals, schools. I never had a family." "You would make a wonderful mother," Arthur said quietly and honestly. Natalie flushed. They studied for 2 hours. Mother, home, love, thank you. With every new sign, Arthur grew more confident. Natalie suggested, "Try saying, 'I love you.'" He signed a phrase, slowly, each movement deliberate. "Very good," she praised. Then Arthur asked her to show it the way a professional did. And Natalie moved like a dancer, her hands weaving meaning and grace. Arthur watched, mesmerized. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "You are beautiful when you speak with your hands," he added, and she looked down. Her heart pounded. He rose to leave early for a morning meeting. "Tomorrow evening?" she offered. "Yes," he said. Down in the hallway, he paused, jacket on, looked at her, and took a step closer. "You are a special woman," he said softly. He raised his hand and touched her cheek very carefully. For a suspended second, their faces were an inch apart, and then his phone rang loudly and insistently. They broke apart. "Sorry," Arthur muttered into the phone. "Yes, I remember the meeting." When Natalie closed the door and leaned against it, she asked herself what was happening to her. He was only a student, she thought. Lessons, nothing more. But her hands still remembered the warmth of his palm. 2 weeks later, the hospital corridor was a familiar route for Natalie. She stopped at room 12, but heard voices inside. Arthur was speaking with a doctor. Max is well enough to leave, the doctor said. You could take him home tomorrow morning. Natalie turned to go, but Max burst out into the corridor and threw himself at her feet, hugging her legs. She stroked his hair, and he signed, beaming. Are you coming home tomorrow? Yes, he signed. Dad learned a lot of signs. Do you want to see? Max dragged her into the room. Arthur stood by the window in his suit. He looked tired but careful. Hello, he said softly. Hello, Natalie answered, suddenly cool. The tension between them was an electric current they both pretended not to feel. Max pulled on his father's sleeve. Dad, show her. Arthur signed deliberately. Maxim, I love you. You are the most important thing in my life. His movements were confident. Natalie watched, pangs of both pain and pleasure twisting inside her. You managed without me, she said quietly. Max signed back. We missed you. Especially Dad. Both adults blushed. Max, gather your drawings. Arthur said out loud and in signs. The child ran to the table, and Arthur and Natalie were left alone. Natalie, we need to talk, Arthur said, softening. About what? She asked. About what happened between us, he answered. Nothing happened, she said, turning away. It did, and you know it, he countered. Max returned with a stack of pictures. At the top was a drawing of the three of them, a big house, hand in hand. This is our new house, Max signed, and this is the garden Daddy bought. Natalie looked at Arthur, startled. You bought a house? Our apartment is too small for a child, he explained quietly. He needs space to play. That's right, Natalie said, and something in her softened. Max signed. Natalie, will you move with us? Want to see our house? Arthur answered hurriedly. Tomorrow is Saturday. We could, but Natalie hesitated. I can't stay, sunshine. I have work. No work, insisted Max, folding his hands and pleading sign language that any parent would find impossible to ignore. His eyes were full of hope. Natalie couldn't deny the child. Okay, she said, but just for a little while. The next day, they arrived at Arthur's new house, a two-story home outside the city with wide windows and a garden. Max ran from room to room, showing Natalie every corner. This is my room, he signed, giddy. This is Daddy's, and this one is Mommy's, he said, opening the third bedroom and lighting up with a naive certainty. This room is for Mommy, he signed innocently. Natalie froze. Arthur moved quickly to correct him. Max, that's the guest room, he said, but the boy persisted. You said Mommy will live here, he signed plaintively. The two adults met one another's eyes in awkward silence. Let's go out to the garden, Natalie suggested, and they all hurried outside. Max ran about with a wooden sword while his parents sat on a bench watching him. I'm sorry he says such things, Arthur said. He just dreams of a full family. Natalie responded quietly. We're friends. You learn to communicate with your son. That is what matters. Arthur turned to her, voice lower. What if I don't want to be just friends? Natalie rose from the bench. Arthur, we already talked about this. No, we didn't, Arthur objected. You decided for both of us. You assumed I could not love again because I loved Anna. She was silent. You're wrong. Arthur went on urgently, stepping closer. I love my wife. She was part of my life, but she's gone and I am still here. I have the right to be happy. I fell in love with you, Natalie, not because you look like Anna, but because you are you. Max came running up with his toy sword, tugging them into play. Natalie laughed, and they played ball until sunset. The child's happiness was infectious. Still, a little voice in her head whispered of the danger of growing close. What if nothing came of it, and the child's motherly attachment was broken? She was afraid of being the cause of another loss for him. That evening, Arthur drove her home. Max slept in the back seat with his head on a cushion. Thank you for today, Arthur said, stopping at her building. Max was so happy. He wasn't the only one, Natalie said, then added with a harder edge, Arthur, I need a break. What? He asked. Max is getting attached to me, and I'm not sure I can be what he wants, she said, looking at the sleeping boy. Do you know what you want? I want him to be happy, Arthur said. And you? To know he is happy, she answered. Then stay with us. Arthur's eyes pleaded. Natalie turned away. "I can't," she said and climbed out of the car. "Wait." Arthur called as she reached her door. He put his hand to show the sign he had been learning. "I will wait." Natalie felt the heart stumble. Max had chosen his mother. For the next week, Natalie rearranged her schedule to avoid seeing them. She worked with other children, but she could not erase the image of Max's blue eyes from her mind. The pediatrician, Dr. Peters, found her in the staff room with an anxious expression. "Natalie, we need your help. Max isn't eating. He's not drawing. He's not responding to treatment." Natalie's hands tightened. "What do the doctors say?" "Depression. He keeps pointing at the door and signing. The father doesn't understand." "We had difficulties," Natalie began, then shook her head. "This is about the child." She went to room 12. Max lay facing the wall. Arthur sat rigid by the bedside, holding his son's hand and looking utterly exhausted. Stubble on his jaw, shirt unbuttoned, reddened eyes. "Please, Max, eat something," Arthur pleaded in signs. The boy didn't respond. Natalie quietly entered. "Hello," she signed. Arthur's face lit with a flaring hope. "You came?" he said. Doctors had told him Max was ill. Not physically, but the weight of sorrow had drained the child's appetite and will. Natalie called him softly. "Max," she signed, and he turned. His eyes brightened like sunshine through clouds. "Angel, you came back," he signed. Natalie picked him up, and he snuggled against her like a small kitten. "I thought you were gone," he signed. Like a mother. Natalie's heart clutched. "I'm here," she signed back. "I was busy." Max straightened and looked seriously at Natalie. "Daddy is sad. Every day he asks when you'll come back." She looked at Arthur, who had turned to stare out the window, shoulders rounded. "Max, you must eat," she signed. "You can get better only if you eat." The boy nodded. "I'll eat if you stay," he bargained. "All right." Arthur agreed, but only if he ate the whole meal. Max nodded vigorously, and Natalie helped feed him spoonful by spoonful. Arthur watched, silent, perhaps ashamed, perhaps thankful. After the meal, Max asked to draw. He sketched their familiar three-person house. "Who's that?" Natalie asked. "Family," Max signed, then pointed to the woman in the picture and looked at Natalie. He raised his hands slowly in a sign no one had taught him, the sign for mother. "You are my mommy," he signed with certainty. Natalie stopped mid-breath. Arthur's face was suddenly very close to hers. "Max is right," Arthur said softly. "We could be a family if you want." Natalie looked into his eyes. "Arthur, I know you are afraid that I think you still love Anna," she said gently. He squeezed her hands. "I loved Anna. She was my first love, the mother of my child. But you are my future," he said, voice shaking. Max hugged Natalie's neck and signed, "Stay with us, please." Something inside Natalie that had been broken began to thaw. "I love both of you," she whispered. Arthur pulled her to him, and their lips met in a soft, aching kiss. Max clapped with delight. "Now we are a real family," he signed. They embraced, 3 bodies, 3 hearts. Natalie felt a sense of home she had never known, not tied to a particular apartment or hospital, but in the arms of these 2 people who had become her people. "Will you move in with us?" Arthur asked later, practical and hopeful. "What about my work?" she asked. "There will be time for work," Arthur said. Max produced a new drawing of a 3-story house and happily explained how the first floor was for Dad's office, the second for their living space, and the third for children. "Which children?" Natalie laughed. "My brothers and sisters," Max said matter-of-factly. "They'll come in 9 months." "Where did you learn about 9 months?" Arthur asked, smiling. "I read it online," the kid said simply. They both laughed, and he added seriously, "First the wedding, then the children. Then when will the wedding be?" Max asked, direct and eager. "When Mommy says yes," Arthur answered. Max pleaded with his hands. "Mommy, say yes." Natalie touched his head and whispered yes, and he hooped. That evening the 3 of them drove home together, Max asleep between them holding both their hands. The setting sun painted the city in gold. Arthur squeezed Natalie's hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For teaching me to be a father. For agreeing to be Max's mother. For showing love can grow and not end." Natalie's fingers found his. Ahead lay a house and the possibility of dreams. But happiness came under threat. It never took long in their world. Late that night, a menacing-looking man in sunglasses approached Natalie in the park. He introduced himself as a private investigator working for Victor Saville, a man Arthur had once done business with. Saville doesn't play fair, the PI said bluntly. If Ivanov refuses to accept his terms, accidents happen. Natalie dashed home, trembling, and called Arthur. They've threatened Max, she said. We need to do something. Hours later, Arthur returned home with a hard, stone expression. He put a pistol on the bedside table, a new measure of precaution. Do you know how to shoot? She asked. I was trained in the army, he said. I never imagined I'd need it. I am terrified, Arthur. For Max. She lay down close to him. If Saville can find us, we cannot run forever. We fight, Arthur said. That night, neither slept. One morning, a stranger's words cut deep into their small household life. The detective in the park had said, it would be sad if something happened to such a beautiful boy. The threat was no longer abstract. They developed a plan, reluctantly. Arthur would attempt to meet with Saville to exchange the contracts Saville wanted for the boy's safety, but they both knew Saville's greed would not stop at money. Tensions built. Arthur's voice got quiet and harder. He started making choices, cold ones, that terrified Natalie. One evening, after more arguments and a hard-set decision, Arthur told her she had to leave that night. The house felt like a stage where everyone played a part. What? Natalie asked, stunned. I've thought about it, he said, in a voice that had lost warmth. Saville's right. You become a liability. Arthur, what are you saying? She demanded. The truth. I'm losing money, peace, time because of you. Max will forget eventually. He spoke coldly. When I marry in a different circle, with a woman who understands my life, not a simple interpreter who hoped to catch a rich man. His words were knives. Natalie clutched a chair back and stung with tears. Arthur, please don't do this. Don't let Saville determine fate. Saville has nothing to do with it. Arthur snapped. It's my decision. I'm tired of pretending. Max, who didn't understand all the words, saw the tears and ran to Natalie, clinging to her legs. Mom, what's wrong? He signed helplessly. Natalie knelt, tears choking her. It's okay, my sunshine, she signed, but the words cracked. Arthur pulled Max away. She is not your mother, he declared harshly. Stop calling her that. She's leaving. Max looked between them confused and then started to cry in that gentle, wordless way deaf children often do. Only tears and shaking shoulders. Please don't go, he signed, begging. I'll be good. I'll listen. Natalie knelt before him and signed through her sobs. You are the best boy in the world. This isn't about you. Then to Arthur, she said, What then is it about? He stood like a statue, face cold, and gave her 1 hour to pack. Max watched her fold clothes, eyes wide and grieving. Where are you going? He asked. To a friend's in another city, she said truthfully. I don't know when I'll be back. Is it because of me? Did I do something wrong? He asked. No, she signed, hugging him. You are perfect. She scribbled a letter in signs and pictures, a note only someone who knew sign language could read. This is for you and your father. Read it, she told Max. The message said in careful gestures and drawings, Max, you're the most beautiful thing that happened to me. Arthur, thank you for letting me be part of your family. I will always love you both. Much klung teuter. Don't go, Mommy, he whispered with his hands. She kissed his forehead, grabbed her suitcase, and left. At the door, Arthur said flatly, A taxi is waiting. Natalie turned, and for a moment she said quietly, One day you will understand you made a mistake. My only mistake is that I waited too long to say this, he answered, softer than before. Take care of Max. I'll take care of him, she said, and the door closed with a muffled click. The morning after Natalie left, Arthur woke to Max shaking his shoulder. The boy stood at the bedside, holding her picture letter. Dad, what does this mean? He signed. Arthur read the symbols, each stroke made with affection, and tried to answer. He could not. Is Mommy bad? Why did you send her away? It's not your business, Arthur barked, and the boy recoiled, frightened by the tone. Max whispered, Imishe. Arthur went into the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. He thought he had protected his son by pushing Natalie away. Now the picture of the only woman he had loved since Anna was gone, and the weight of that loss pushed at his chest. He realized the irony. He had thrown away the chance at a new kind of life out of fear and pride. A month passed. Max no longer signed to his father. He ate and slept and went to school, but something had fallen silent inside him. Then a phone call came. "Hello, Arthur," said a voice he recognized, Saval's. "The girl left, as you wanted." But Saval was not satisfied. "You forgot about the contract." "What contract?" Arthur demanded. "You remember the Japanese deal. Either money or the girl," Saval said with a sneer. Arthur felt his blood run cold. "She left. Now pay up." Arthur slammed down the phone. "You're crazy," he spat. Saval laughed. "Now that your son is with us under my supervision, things just got easier. I have someone with your boy. Do you want to hear him?" On the line, a child's muffled cry, then Max's small voice, "Daddy, help." The world tilted. Arthur tore out the door, calling to find his son. No one knew where Max was. Then a new video arrived. A dim, grainy clip of Max tied to a chair inside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Someone had sent it. A timed message, "Contract or your son." Arthur grabbed his coat, and the first thing he did was call every detective, every contact. He found out Saval had planned this carefully. He was given hours, 24 to hand, over the contract. Panic and fury and the smell of gasoline in his gut. He could not bear the thought of harm coming to his son. He drove, rushed, plotted, and finally found himself at Natalie's school in Boston, where she had gone after leaving the city, pounding on a classroom door. Natalie Anatolievna, the director, announced awkwardly, and there she was, the woman who had made his son smile. She was shocked to see him, thinner, eyes rimmed red with sleepless nights. "What are you doing here?" she asked breathlessly as the children filed out. Arthur held up his phone and showed the video. Natalie's face went white. "Saval did this," Arthur said. "He wants the contract. I have to give it to him to get our son back." "You gave up on me for you to protect me?" she asked, betrayal and anger and relief and worry all mixing in one look. "You decided for me, Arthur." "Yes," he said, suddenly small. "I lied. I said the words I needed to say to keep you safe. I thought if you left, he'd leave us alone. I thought I'd stop him. I was wrong." Natalie's anger cracked into something fierce. "You made the choice without me?" "Yes." "You idiot," she said, and the word was half laugh, half accusation. "But not now. Now we have to save Max." They drove to the city together in silence, planning in the car. Saval would arrange a public exchange, assurances to be checked, cameras, everything staged. They would go to the place, Arthur with the contract, Natalie hidden nearby. If anything went wrong, they would escape. The next day, Arthur received a final video. Max looked gaunt and fragile. He signed to the camera, "Dad, I am scared. Mommy, come back." The image made Natalie's hands tremble. They met Saval at noon at a crowded, famous square downtown, a place with churches and tourists, where no one would notice one more grim-faced man carrying a folder. Saval arrived with two burly guards. Arthur walked up with the folder and hands that suddenly felt heavy. "Contract?" Saval asked, greed clear in his tone. "Where's the boy?" Arthur demanded. "First the documents," Saval said. He opened the folder and scanned the papers, gave a quick nod, and then led Arthur to a sleek black vehicle. Natalie followed discreetly in a taxi, her heart hammering. They drove to a deserted warehouse far outside the city. Max sat in the corner, tied to a chair, tears on his face. For a moment, he brightened at the sight of his father. "Papa," he signed. Arthur stepped forward and began to free the ropes, but Saval stopped him cold. "Not yet," he said. "I want more. I want your whole company. I want everything." Arthur's protests were cut off as the guards produced weapons and pressed them coldly at Arthur's back. "Sign here, transfer ownership, or suffer an accident." In that moment, a familiar warmth, a small human defiance, flashed in Arthur's eyes. He shielded Max with his body like a man burying his head in a storm. Natalie crept through a back window and hid behind crates. Max's eyes found her, and there was luminous joy in his face. He tried to shout, but Natalie made a sharp, quiet sign. "Quiet." Saval finished a call to his lawyer, declared the contract valid, and gave the nod. The guards motioned for Arthur to sign. Arthur began to loosen Max's bonds when Saville decided to press for more. "You got what you wanted," he said. "Now, give me everything." The guards drew weapons. At that instant, Natalie rushed forward. Max's face lit up. "Mommy, you came." He signed with a gasp of relief. Saville barked at the guards, "Shoot." A frantic fight broke out. Arthur lunged at a guard to wrest the pistol from his hand. One of the goons raised a gun towards Natalie. Arthur threw himself, tackling one attacker. A shot rang out. A bullet embedded in the warehouse wall. Arthur wrestled the shooter to the floor, took the gun, and for a striking moment he held it pointed at Saville. "Enough," he shouted, voice raw. "You won't harm them." Saville raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "You're not a killer, Arthur," he hissed. "You're a businessman. But today you are a father." At that precise second, a second guard stunned everyone. The man Arthur had assumed was down rose with a knife and lunged. "Arthur, behind you!" Natalie cried. Arthur spun as the blade flashed. Natalie signed fast to Max. "Say to Daddy with your voice that you love him." Max looked at her blankly for a second. "You can do it," she urged. "Try for Daddy." Max inhaled as the men struggled and bellowed with all the voice he had inside. "Daddy." The sound was raw and small and shockingly real. The guard froze. The warehouse held its breath. Max shouted again, croaky and earnest, "I love you." The words were thin, but genuine. Arthur's hands trembled. The knife fell, the attacker froze. Then, as if a spell had been broken, Arthur crumpled to his knees and wept. "Max, you spoke," he sobbed. Max leaped forward and threw his arms around his father. "Papa," he whispered, the sign meant to mean so much. "Don't cry." Arthur pressed his son to his chest and laughed through tears, the sound of a man reborn. Police sirens came. Someone had heard the shot, and officers burst into the warehouse. Saville and his men surrendered without much resistance, the case crumbling around their bravado. An officer approached Arthur and asked if anyone was hurt. "No," he said, looking at Natalie and Max. "We're all okay. We're family." Max, full of childlike pride, looked at the officer and said aloud, "Mom saved me. Dad saved me. They're heroes." The cop smiled, and the three of them walked out into the fading light together, as if nothing could break them now. A year later, the Ivanov family had a new house in the country. Large windows, a garden with swings and flower beds where Max could dig with the same concentrated joy he had when he was 5. Saturday morning smelled of pancakes and laughter. Max sat at the kitchen table, stirring batter as Natalie taught him. His speech, small at first, had blossomed into a confident, nearly perfect voice. He asked, "Are we going to the lake today?" and sign it too, out of habit and joy. Arthur wandered into the kitchen in comfortable clothes, carrying a small velvet box. "Good morning, family," he said, voice trembling. Max noticed the box immediately. "Dad, what's that?" he asked. Arthur smiled. "A surprise for Mommy," he said. Natalie's heart skipped. They had lived a year together. The happiest year of Arthur's life, he said. He had meant what he said that day at the kitchen table. Natalie had become his wife in every way that mattered, though they had never formalized it. But he wanted it to be official. Arthur knelt in the middle of the kitchen. "Natalie Anatievna Walker," he began, signing, and then speaking. "Will you marry me?" Natalie covered her mouth, tears spilling over. Arthur closed his eyes and carefully signed. "Natalie, you taught me love. Now I want to say the most important words in my life in this language. Will you marry me?" Max, delighted and ceremonious, solemnly opened the box and presented the ring. "Mom," he said seriously, pressing the diamond into her palm, "Dad says he loves you more than stars." "I do too," Natalie said, yes amid laughter and tears. Arthur slid the ring on her finger. Max cheered. "Now I have an official mommy," he declared happily. 3 months later, white ribbons and flowers decorated the same garden. It was a small wedding with only close friends. The special thing about the ceremony was that everyone learned the signs. Natalie's friend from Boston interpreted the ritual in ASL, and Arthur's colleagues, gawky at first, repeated the simple phrases, hands awkward but full of meaning. Children from a school where Natalie taught sat in the front row signing, "We love you." Max stood in a crisp white shirt and bow tie beside his father and announced proudly, "I am Max Ivanov, 8 years old. Today I have a real mom." He looked at Natalie, squeezed her hand, and thanked her aloud and in signs. "Thank you for teaching Dad to speak with his hands. Thank you for coming in my dreams when I was scared. Thank you for staying with us forever." The garden held its breath. Minnie cried. Natalie knelt to hug Max, grateful. "Now kiss," he demanded, delighted as only a child could be. They kissed. The day closed with music, a few clumsy signs from bureaucrats, and a lot of love. Evenings afterward were simple and perfect. The family sat on the garden swing under stars as Max drew in his album. "Look," he said one night, showing a drawing of a 3-story house. Daddy working on the first floor, Mommy reading on the second, and many small children playing on the third. "Who are those children?" Natalie asked. "My brothers and sisters," Max said perfectly plain, as if that had always been the plan. "They'll come in 9 months. Arthur and Natalie glanced at each other and laughed. "Where did you learn about 9 months?" Arthur teased. "I read it on the internet," Max said, as if that explained everything. They embraced, breathing in the quiet miracle of ordinary life. Max would say later, softly one night, "When I used to call Mom in my dreams, I didn't know if she would come. Now she's with me awake. It's better." Natalie kissed his brow. Arthur listened and felt something finish healing in his chest. They had learned a language together, one made of patience and touch and small daily acts. Their house became the place where the deaf children from Natalie's school came to learn, where sign language was as natural as shouting on a playground, because love, they all agreed, is a language everyone can learn. The greatest thing Arthur understood after Anna's death was that love can return. It changes shape, but it can grow new things. Max was right from the very beginning. A family is made of hearts learning the same language. Love needed no translation. Lights came on in the windows, and the next chapter of their lives began. Not without scars or memory, but together. If you like their story, leave a rating and subscribe for more tales of love that crosses barriers.